Hello and welcome. Click like and subscribe below. This is the Lowdown with Tony Lowe, episode 12, I think. Our guest today is Godfrey Plata, and he is running for California State Assembly 53.
That's right. District 53.
Man. I practiced.
You got it.
And he's going to kind of explain what that is a bit as well, because I was confused about it. But we'll get to that in a moment. First off, hello, Godfrey.
Hi, Tony. Thanks for having me on.
My pleasure. I wanted to say something because today is, in fact, Juneteenth. And it's an important day. I think by now social media has pretty well educated everyone on what Juneteenth is. But if not, this is the day that if you imagine that last plantation to get the horse with the rider, and he's got his paper and he reads the news, man, that this country is not going to have legal slavery. That news was read, and we celebrate that today. They have a state holiday in Texas, and some folks trying to make it national, which is fantastic. But for me, it just represents a beginning. And my hope is that my friends of color can rest today and celebrate while the rest of us continue to fight on their behalf. Is kind of how I think of it. And what's it like being in politics right now with the way it is? And on Juneteenth, is there any way that it impacts you in your campaign or your life or anything you want to say about it?
Yeah. So a couple of things about me. The first time I ever heard of Juneteenth was in Texas. Texas is where I got my start teaching, actually. I'm zooming in from California and Los Angeles right now. But after college, I headed off to Houston, Texas, which incidentally is the most diverse city in the nation. A lot of people don't know that.
That's true. My brother is down there.
Oh, okay. Whereabouts?
Well, all I know is Houston.
Yeah, Houston's gigantic. But Houston is the first place that I had heard about Juneteenth, which is awful because I had moved to the United States. I'm an immigrant from the Philippines. I moved at the age of 4. I've spent all of my life in our public school system here in the United States. I went to college at a private university in Virginia, the University of Richmond, on a scholarship. And nowhere in there had I really internalized that there was this thing called Juneteenth until I actually was in the state where it happened. In Houston, literally there is a plot of land that is now called Emancipation Park. And Emancipation Park commemorates the land where folks who were formerly enslaved gathered to celebrate Juneteenth after its announcement. So for me, I connected back to actually being in Texas and learning about it and understanding that Juneteenth was a celebration that many Black folks had. And now there's more and more recognition for it, clearly because we are in present times, calling for defunding the police, saying Black Lives Matter all across the nation, et cetera. And so it's in the consciousness of a lot of people right now. For me, it's something I've known about for quite some time. When I think about Juneteenth, aside from like what it is, some things that I think people really ought to know is that Juneteenth commemorates 2.5 years between the time of the Emancipation Proclamation and the time that this proclamation was made. And I think that's just incredibly symptomatic, emblematic of the entire American experience, where literally Black folks were waiting 2.5 years for the implementation of their freedom.
Isn't that crazy?
How long do we make Black folks wait for us to get from like an intention into impact?
And by the way, still waiting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Still waiting.
Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
No, I was just going to say something that I care very deeply about is that we all need to get very real with ourselves and dispel the American myths that we cling to so desperately. That frankly, we have the power to make true.
Mm-hmm.
We in America have the power to make this nation one where every American citizen gets to has unalienable rights.
Mhm.
And
Actual dignity as a human.
that are guaranteed and defended by the government who works for us.
That's right. And you see, like so I actually looked up the actual proclamation. It's called General Order Number 3. This is the thing that was read in Galveston, Texas, to actually proclaim what we now call Juneteenth.
Yeah.
And not only do we know this was happening 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, but in the actual proclamation, folks who were formerly enslaved, now they're called freedmen, were immediately transitioned from a master-slave relationship to an employer-hired labor relationship. It's literally within the same lines of it. But when we think about how racism and capitalism like are dually like aligned with each other, and you see that here in 1865, that's something we haven't gotten away from at all. Like immediately, folks who are now free were now at the disposal of their white employers, and that still perpetuated white supremacy at the time and continues to this day. The other thing that struck me in the language of the actual proclamation was a charge to all folks who are now freed to be quiet, remain at their present homes, and work for wages. And I just like immediately thought of the most recent curfews that were enacted across the nation for when there's an opportunity for resistance or for voice. What people are told by the state is actually just like stay at home, be quiet, just do your work is what people are asked to do. So 155 years later, we really haven't changed very much.
Oh no, and even then, they say there's no slavery, unless of course if you break one of these 1,000 tiny little laws we have for you, then you can be pressed into forced labor. And by the way, Mr. Johnson, it looks like yes, the ledger is definitely correct. You owe us $4,000 and get back behind the barn, sir. I mean, it's the worst. It's just the worst.
And it starts at a really early age. So I'm a former teacher. I taught 7th grade, which is a fun grade where kids don't know whether they are kids or adults, but it's, everyone goes through it at some point. And within a week or so of me being in the classroom, I was asked by my assistant principal whether or not I wanted to press charges on a 12-year-old girl who, what she had done is literally pass me a note in the middle of class, which she shouldn't have done, but like she passed me a note that said "F you, Mr. Plata" on it, and then she ran outside the classroom. And when I stuck my head out my door to go see where she had gone, she was gone already. So I called my assistant principal, and that was the option presented to me: do you want to press charges on her? And so we put like kids of color in this box immediately of needing to be controlled and giving other people who are empowered by the state, right? Like I was like a public employee through the public schools to put that person, that kid, down a line that would possibly send them to prison at some point. It starts so early.
In 7th grade, the most important thing going on in terms of a 7th grader's development is they're figuring out that they have experiences separate from those around them. Like very defined, I have a self that's completely independent from yours. And their whole job in their maturity, and as you know, like hormonally, physically, they're faster. They're not ready to be in the body they're in. And their whole job is to figure out this weird friction of I end here, this is how much autonomy I have, and this is how much I don't. It seems like a bad time to create a power struggle.
Yeah. And it happens like not just like one kid at a time, right? It happens at scale. So, in education, a lot of the push has been toward standardized testing, and that has created schools that have celebrated order. And what order looks like at their schools is walking in straight lines, like doing this in the classroom and like literally trying to stay that way an entire class long. And a lot of times the schools that end up leveraging those types of tactics are schools that serve communities of color. And when you compare that type of environment to the environment that like maybe white affluent folks in private school have, that's certainly none of what white and affluent folks go to. So at a very early age, we're establishing cultures of control for our students of color. And you know, like that has consequences, because then you go through your life, and I know this as an immigrant, you go through your life thinking that you're just supposed to keep your head down, follow the rules, and that's how you're going to succeed. And then you stop challenging these rules that have been created to oppress us. And then you have all this stuff to unpack all of a sudden as an adult. So we do so much so early that puts us in the wrong direction.
So everybody who's watching this, when we're done, go to Godfrey's website and watch the video Rules and Consequences.
Oh, you did your homework. Yeah.
And if you like what you hear, your next homework is to read the work of the writer Jean Anyon. I don't know if you ever studied Jean Anyon.
No, say more.
So Jean Anyon, and I'm not this smart. I just happened to be reading it for a different show I did. But Jean Anyon broke down how class in America actually teaches different skills and different ways of engaging in the world based on what class you're in. So it's divided into 5 strata. It's exactly what you're talking about, but it's more than rules. It's actually the way that we learn to process information, and the way we, like the higher up strata are actually taught and trained to use influence and communication to change the nature of their projects and their environment. Whereas the lower down you go, the class totem pole, the bottom rungs, the young people are learning to have grit and fill and plug and chug. So sit still, walk the hall. You're being trained to be a cog in a factory.
Yeah.
And then the other point you made that was excellently said, we cannot talk about race in America without tying it directly to class division. There is no way. If you start out a nation, and I loved what the woman whose name I cannot remember at the moment, but the one who so eloquently raged, and that's how I would describe it. She eloquently raged against those complaining about the looters. And she was saying, it's a monopoly game. And every time the thing goes around, you get your money, I don't get mine. And we do that for 400 years. And then you want to suddenly, you expect me to start the game. She's like, no, I will burn it all down. You want to know why I'm breaking this store? It's not mine. And I don't care about your target. I'm using nicer language than she.
Sure, yeah.
So, not that we have to on this show, but just for the heck of it. So let's if you don't mind, let's get into this a little bit, because this whole the capitalism thing.
Yeah.
Here's the deal. People get scared when we critique capitalism. We don't need to be, folks. And here's why I want to stress that real hard, because I am a believer in everything that capitalism is promising. I'm a believer in a free market. I want every American to be able to use their skills, and if they offer a service, a product, an idea that is of more interest to everyone in the community, they get rewarded for that, just naturally. What has happened to us is all those winners over the last 100 years or so, have been allowed to band together. This guy buys this guy, this company over here buys this company, these folks buy this thing, they all stick together, and we're down to 6 giant corporations. And that would not necessarily be the end of the world, except we also allow them to finance all the political campaigns. And so the working class doesn't have a say anymore. And what I've been saying to folks is that when you see the working class folks with guns storm the Capitol, saying we're not going to be locked in our house anymore. Or you see some other folks and they're protesting in the street out of the mistreatment that they're having on along race lines. There is a common thread that ties all of this together. And that is the establishment government took care of those uber rich corporations. And the word used to be trickle down. None of that stuff is trickling down to the working class. All that's happening is we're losing our jobs. We're going to have to work for Amazon or Walmart or one of these giants that's left. We're going to work for them and shop from them. And they control our government and we can't change it. So, and that's why I'm doing this long preamble, Godfrey, because I have respect and I have questions.
Yeah.
For progressive candidates like yourself who are saying, look, I'm not going to choose a corporatist from the right who's obsessed with throwing money up the ladder to the 1%, but also we're not being served by corporatist neoliberals who are just as beholden.
That's right.
That's why we just saw the CARES Act and the HEROES Act that was proposed, and all of it is throwing money up the thing.
Yeah.
Bailing out rent collectors, debt collectors. And that's kind of where, to me, that's why I wanted to talk to you. Because you represent someone who basically doesn't fit in any establishment box.
Neither of them. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, your power analysis is exactly my own in that we know that over time, our current elected officials have been able to get to a place where they are because they've been able to work both a party structure that is tied already to corporations, et cetera, and they're friendly so that the corporations continue to grow and get policies that they need, et cetera, and they get to back those parties to continue to build party strength.
That's right.
Like that's happening. And so folks who tend to be in elected office, especially at the state level or higher, have close relationships there because they know that that is their way in. And at the same time, there are also public officials who, even outside of party structure, already orient themselves in a way that is corporate friendly.
Yeah.
In that way. Potentially that's just because of who they are, how they grew up, who their family members are, who their own networks are, what they currently do. They have just like self-interest around maintaining a corporate structure. So both of those things are happening. I'm neither of those. You mentioned that. I'm a former teacher. Now my job is I work at a nonprofit and I get to help teachers learn how to organize and make sure that they have an understanding of how to get their experiences and stories and the experiences and stories of their students to influence the system. Because there's too many decision makers who have no idea what's happening in public schools. So getting their voices out there is like super important. At the same time, what that means for me, because I've chosen to run for office in a world that actually props up everything I talked about before, what that means is that when I'm fundraising in order to do voter outreach, because people don't know why you fundraise, first of all, it's like I'm not raising money for my salary. I'm not doing this full time. I have another job. I have a full-time job and I'm running a campaign on top of this. I'm raising money to reach out to voters. But my base is teachers. And so folks can't write a check for what the max is in my race, which is $4,700. Right? Like I don't have friends who are writing $4,700 checks. I've got literally like, sometimes I get $3, $5, $10 donations. Yeah. I'm lucky sometimes to get 100, 200, 500. Like that's like people who are like believers in like what we're doing and have the opportunity to give that money. But what I'm doing like is kind of like rebuilding people's muscle memory, right? Like I know how hard it is to try to like cause a dent in a system that is so used to taking money from corporations and special interests that now it is so unexpected to see someone actually choose a different route. What I am hoping to do as one of the many progressives running right now who have sworn off corporate PAC money, special interest money, et cetera, is to change the narrative of what is allowable and viable in our society. Because that's democracy work, right? Democracy is not just about winning seats, it's how you get there. And until those of us who feel like we can take the risk to do so jump into this fray and try to do things another way, we're never going to be able to get to that point where someone can do this in an acceptable way.
And I think taking a risk is a good way to say it.
Yeah.
The voter is going to take a risk.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna let's say it straight like it is. We're not just going to take a risk. We're going to take a hit, but it's worth it.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that is you're going to catch flack. If you say, I'm not going to vote for the popular person, I'm going to vote for someone, they say you're throwing your vote away.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what's the worst that could happen? Someone that doesn't represent me gets into the office? Because I'm telling you, the choices you're approving for me, neither one represents me. So how am I throwing my vote away if I vote for someone who does? And the idea is to get enough folks to say, wait a minute, my values are like this other candidate. When we need enough of those people to say, I'm going to take a risk and I'm going to spend my vote on something that matters to me.
Mm-hmm.
And Americans should be freaked out when they have like the presidential debates. And they say, well, so-and-so didn't raise enough money to get on the debate stage. That should scare you to
flags, like major flags.
But we accept it. Oh, well, they didn't meet their fundraising goal. That's not a reason to disqualify.
Mm-hmm.
None of us who are trying to be spoken for could afford to get on that stage.
Yeah. And that's how the system works. It's going to continue incentivizing the previous behaviors that it has relied on to be able to do its job. And so, like, you know, you can logically follow the science of that exact decision to only allow people who can fundraise a certain amount. The United States is large. You're going to need lots of money to be able to outreach to people. We're trying to get Trump out of office. So, of course, they're going to like find the most fundraising viable people as a cutoff. But like, there's this like catch-22, right? How are people supposed to build base if its own party is putting barriers in front of it, of like people to be able to represent themselves and the people they represent?
And how has this happened to the Democratic Party, where they've become out of touch with the workers? I mean, it has happened, y'all. You know, when I hear, I almost, because this election means so much to me, I don't want to badmouth any candidates. And I don't mean to, but seriously, man, the whole country's in the streets, burning their cities down, saying they want police reform. And the answer is throw more money at the police.
Mm-hmm.
That's really?
It's literally the opposite of the call to action, which is defund the police.
Yeah, it's like one guy will turn the police directly on me for speaking my mind, and the other guy will just shoot me if I'm, suspected of a specific crime. Yeah. I mean, it's just like, those are your two arguments? Like, we're saying something different.
Yeah. It's a politics of fear, right? Because like the Democratic Party, I think like even outside of Trump, and I see this in California, which has a supermajority of Democrats in our legislature. We have a Democratic governor. I'm still seeing the Democratic Party operate in a really fearful way to maintain the strength of its organization. And when it does so, it plays toward the center or even to the right of center to be able to grow its base is what it's hoping to do, as opposed to there's 483,000 people in the district I'm running in, so like 500,000 people, but only 24,000 people, I want to name that gap again, only 24,000 people actually voted for the Democrat currently in the seat that I'm running for. Right. So that's like just a sliver of Democrats in the district at all that are even at the place where they would consider taking a risk for who to vote for. There's hundreds and thousands of people that the Democratic Party have not even tapped into yet, but they're playing to the people who have just historically been vocal. And that keeps us in this trap. And
America loves a winner. Mm-hmm. And so that means they don't care if the winning candidate only got 40% of the people's approval and the other person got 30% and a bunch of people stayed home. Mm-hmm. They don't care that people aren't being represented by their government. What they want is to play the game and it's like a boxing match. I'm rooting for the guy. My guy won, and it's like, but you're supposed to win. It's not them that win. You're the one that's supposed to win. What did you win?
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Yeah.
But we would rather do that. That's why it's so wild. You know.
Yeah.
What about? So okay, I don't know anything about the district you're in, but
Sure.
I do want to know what are some of the issues that the folks you are reaching out to
Yeah.
are looking for change in. What is it that you are? Who are you talking to
Yeah.
out there?
Yeah. Well, I like to say that I'm just another regular everyday person where I live. So for context, because it might be useful for folks who know California a little bit, I'm in the 53rd district, and that is like right in the heart of Los Angeles. If anyone has been to Los Angeles before, that goes from Koreatown, which is just west of downtown Los Angeles, all the way through downtown Los Angeles. So whenever you're watching a Lakers game, or whenever there's like a skyscraper view of downtown LA, that is in my district. And then to the east of that, Boyle Heights, south to Huntington Park and Vernon, which are two cities on the outlier of downtown LA. So it's 500,000 people in there, right in the heart of everything. It's predominantly immigrant, predominantly people of color, predominantly renter. And I say renter, lots of people don't usually think of renter as an identity marker. I typically start with, I'm a gay Filipino immigrant. But I think it is important to actually recognize renter because that is the predominant lifestyle in my district. Lifestyle makes it sound like a choice. It's actually just like what we all are able to do because in Los Angeles, the cost of living is super high. The average rent, the average monthly rent here is right between $2,000 and $2,100 for a one bedroom. When you think about what like minimum wage is, we are just barely starting to get to $15, barely. Like you have to actually make more like 40 something dollars an hour to be able to afford that rent. And so for those of us here who are renters, we are barely hanging on to being able to stay in the second largest city in the United States. And why I'm mentioning all of this is it's the majority of people in my district. It is who I am. I am a renter. And when you look at who our legislature is, there's 80 folks up there who get to make state law for the entire state. Out of the 80 of them, just one is a renter. He is on his way out.
Yeah.
So right now, all of the folks in the legislature, we could be pressing for tenants' rights. We could be pressing for affordable housing. We could be pressing for all of these things. But the folks keeping them there in their seats, one, they're all homeowners, or 25% of them are landlords, actually. And the folks keeping them there are folks like real estate associations, apartment associations, developers, et cetera. And so there's this narrative that our legislature has been able to grow that is saying build, build, build. That's the answer to housing, build more. But we know when we are building more, what we're actually doing is gentrifying the places where we are already living. It's increasing the prices of where we're living because what they're building are luxury apartments. They're not for us. They're for people who want to come into LA.
Yeah.
And that's why renter is actually like the strongest group of people and the block that I am trying to organize because it's literally the basis for survival here in Los Angeles in our district. Last week, the Los Angeles Homeless Services Agency actually released their what they call their homeless count. There's a yearly homeless count here in Los Angeles County. Last year, it was at 58,000 folks who were unhoused in Los Angeles County.
And the real numbers are far more, I'm sure.
Yeah, this year 66,000, right? So an increase of about 12% in just 1 year. And there was a year-over-year increase last year as well. So we can put as many Band-Aids as we want on services for folks who are unhoused, but the number one issue around this growth is the fact that we're pushing people outside of their homes because we're not making housing affordable for folks and we're not protecting tenants enough. That is like a huge community that this is.
Yeah. Let me connect a couple dots for folks that aren't out there, because I've lived in California and I've lived in Ohio. And for folks in Ohio, to put this in perspective, if my listeners here are watching, here you can buy, and I'm not, this isn't made up. Like you could literally buy a Victorian mansion in my hometown for $150,000 or less.
Mhm.
And I'm talking a mansion. Like you'll have a ballroom in your joint. Uh, so it's hard for folks to understand the whole what it's like to fight as a renter. And I want to be really clear about this. California has, because everyone rents. If you're the kind, like anyone who knows me or would know me, anyone you know out there, unless you're uber rich, you don't even, those people, you don't see them. They're not a part of your life. Everyone rents that you know. And it's very difficult to get into a place and be able to afford it. And there are laws about rent control that vary, but you're protected a little bit. Like rent goes up every year, but you're protected to some degree or another.
Mhm.
When Godfrey is talking about gentrification, it's not just about, oh, I don't want this other kind of person in my neighborhood. That's different. That's kind of like the xenophobia you see more in the Midwest. What happens out there is all the things you love about your neighborhood that you and your community have built together by purchasing your things down at your favorite baker, or in Koreatown, there could be like a great vendor or a small, one of those great little shops that someone like me, I don't even know what that food is, but I know that that is legit and I want that. Great food truck culture. But all that stuff goes away if all you do is build an expensive high rise for wealthy folks, because what happens is when they come, big business opens up all those big chain joints that runs all the stuff out that you fought all your life and you and your community have used your collective dollars and your energy to build, and you just enjoy life there together in a small community. And now you have a Whole Foods and all of your stuff is going out of business. And
Yeah.
it didn't have to be like that.
Yeah. And the concessions being made to renters and tenants are so small. Like you're right. We have some rent control measures, but I think a big strategy of folks who want to profit off of real estate development is to buy up current lots of apartments, even like the one that I live in right now. I live in a 19-unit apartment complex. And there are projects being built around our neighborhood within a couple of blocks of where I live. And so someone could want to buy up our entire lot that would like literally bulldoze where I currently live right now, build on top of it. They're required to build around 11% affordable housing. But we don't need 11%, we need 100%. That's why we're here. And the model of housing that we currently subscribe to is one in which housing is a commodity. And that's intention. And when I say housing is a commodity, that means we have to purchase housing, right? Purchase rent, purchase a house. That's intention with this idea that housing is a human right, which people will also stand by. But housing cannot be a human right if someone cannot afford housing and therefore cannot pay for a roof over their head. We're like not standing by our beliefs in that case, and we have to build the protections in the pathway to be able to move more toward that human right model.
That's right.
Yeah.
So, real quick segue, we were talking about, the rioting thing comes up, right? So, I have a question. I was thinking about, I remember the LA riots back in '92, and right where you are was kind of an epicenter for some serious stuff.
Right.
Are there still resurgences? Because there were tensions very specifically between neighborhoods over there. Am I right?
Yeah, so for folks unfamiliar, the 92 uprisings or riots, depending on who you are and what perspective you're taking on it, happened because of one of the earliest forms of videotaped police brutality, which is Rodney King was beat by 4 police officers. Rodney King is a Black man, and then the 4 officers were acquitted. And people took their anger out into the streets. And it wasn't just because of this Rodney King incident that people began to bring their anger out into the streets. There were other incidents of violence against Black folks that were also happening. So here in Koreatown, there are Asian and Korean business owners who were protecting their businesses, but using anti-Blackness as a way to bias against customers who are Black and patrons of their business. And there were folks who, like Black folks, who were shot by business owners here in Koreatown. And so like the amalgamation of both of these things, the violence that police were able to enact on Black bodies, that was going unchecked. And then all of this brutality that was happening in places of business and places of residence, like that was going unchecked. That was like the perfect combustion of anger. And that led to the riots or the uprising. That led to a lot of burnt down buildings, et cetera. As a result of that, I think as a city, Los Angeles has known that it has had to tie its city council much more locally to things happening in neighborhoods. So people don't know this, in Los Angeles, we have a neighborhood council system of 99 different neighborhood councils that really act as advisories to our city council. And the neighborhood councils don't ultimately have a lot of power, but they're at least like plugged into things happening neighborhood by neighborhood so that they can get their pulse on exactly what you're talking about. I think what we're seeing this time around as a result of Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, et cetera, unfortunately there's an et cetera, is there's like a resurgence of where are we putting this anger? But I think in LA, organizers have been really smart about who the targets of the anger ought to be. And I think we knew that in 1992, we were placing communities of color against each other in so many ways. And I think we are learning about that, and we continue to learn about that, and we've learned some lessons from that. This year, intentionally, lots of the protests that have been happening in LA over the last few weeks have happened in more white and affluent areas and in downtown, right? Because like if we ultimately believe in this idea that that the police and the state are going to continue to protect the folks who have money, who are more likely to be white, those are the places that need to know that we don't want the police protecting us in those ways, because they can't. They're always going to protect you. And so I think the protesting has been like just really smart this time around, and it's also a much more diverse coalition, as you've probably seen on the news. And here in LA, it's still going. Like literally, there are Instagrams full of like these like organized, like here are all the protests today. Go to any of these dozen protests. Like they're happening everywhere in LA all the time at multiple times of day.
Godfrey, they're happening everywhere in the country.
Mm-hmm.
Right here, I am in. The only thing that is where I am is farmland and the university I'm attending. Mm-hmm. That's it. And they're marching all the time.
Yeah. Who is they?
Everyone.
That's awesome.
And when I say everyone, what I mean is a very, very diverse demographic of old, young, yuppies, students, punks. You know, if you go into, I'm in Bowling Green, Ohio right now. If you go 40 minutes or so north, maybe less, half an hour north-ish, you'll be in Toledo, Ohio, which is, you know, extremely segregated. And you see everybody together. Sadly, you know, what we keep seeing is that, you know, the organized part of the demonstration will be peaceful. And then it's almost like it's like the after party is really rough. And it's military trained police doing military stuff to angry people in the night, you know, angry citizens. And a lot of I know people personally, right after I did a photo thing with the mayor, like I was with the mayor celebrating that he was down there at the march. And then he went inside and it was, you know, wooden bullets and fun times for all. So
same thing happening here. I mean, you've seen how that has blown up. I was at one of the first marches the Saturday after the George Floyd videos were released, and literally the march was like going just fine. People were cheering on, you know, like sometimes you'll see cars stopped in the middle of a road while helicopters are overhead. They're not stopped because they're trapped. They're stopped because they're supportive. Like they're like, it's COVID, we're in a pandemic. They're protecting themselves from the crowd, but they're part of the same protest. And police, like in that first big protest, police were literally the ones who divided up the march. And then as people tried to go around to join like where the rest of the march was going, they started to fire rubber bullets at that point. And you can't build trust around people who are literally saying defund the police by exerting force around things that like didn't need force exerted upon at all, right?
Yeah, and they're shooting those things, man. I don't know what it's like, what they're using out there, but it's a perfect example of the misuse of the funds, because they're using these things we call knee knockers, and they're wooden bullets, and the reason they're called that is they're designed for policing a group, right? And what they do is you're supposed to shoot the ground. What with a knee knocker, what you're supposed to do, it's a wooden bullet. It's like it looks like if you had one of those little cork guns,
Mm-hmm.
but the cork is a piece of wood.
Yeah,
Right.
wow.
So a knee knocker, you're supposed to shoot the ground and it bounces up into the area, and that ricochet, it gives you enough accuracy, but it just kind of like, hey,
Mm-hmm.
they're shooting people directly and they're breaking
Yeah, there are
bones.
bruises that people have.
Oh, they're terrible. And the videos are awful. Just people in the middle of the street so they get shot. People just standing in the street. That's a reasonable protest.
Yeah.
And just getting shot, like in the back. There's horrible videos.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's been amazing to see folks agitated by this as well. I think like the movement to defund the police and to protect the rights of Black folks around the country. I think the movement has grown because people are now witnessing the same things that Black folks have been talking about literally for centuries, and they're seeing it enacted on more and more diverse crowds of folks. There are tons of calls for like at protests of like white people to the front, because like the police are less likely to be as aggressive with folks who aren't people of color. And we see that happening, but now that's in the consciousness of more and more people. And it makes me optimistic and hopeful that the generation of people who come after us will be living in a much more just society completely.
We have a very bad marketing problem. Defund the police will never play here.
In Ohio.
Not where I'm at. Immediately, no one even wants to hear anything about it.
Yeah.
Don't hear me wrong. There are many citizens and wonderful people and friends of mine where they do understand what that means, but people here understand and approve of punitive justice.
Mm-hmm.
I don't get that. I'm a restorative justice guy.
Mm-hmm.
But here it's like, I need a good guy, I need a bad guy, and somebody's going to pay.
Yeah.
And when you say defund the police, they will not go along with police being punished. They're the bad guy. Wrong. They're the good guy. Screw you. And that's bad. That's pretty much as deep as it's going to get.
Yeah.
However, most of those folks, I was saying, forgive me if anyone has heard me say this before, I was saying most folks who say no to defund the police will also say very much yes to, I'm not going to vote for another school levy. Every time I give them money, they blow it.
Mm-hmm.
All right, now we're talking.
Mm-hmm.
I've been using these examples. The LAPD has, ironically, since you're in Koreatown, LA's got a police budget the size of the entire military.
$3 billion.
Yeah,
3 billion.
3 million.
Billion.
The same,
yeah.
the same figure. That's what North Korea has for their military.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
To hold a nation completely under lock and key, practically.
Mm-hmm.
So what we're saying isn't defund the police. That's the wrong thing to say. What we're saying is we need to be using this money so that the police are trained to protect and serve their communities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They have a job, and they're not doing it well. They're blowing it.
Mm-hmm. I can see why the whole like market, this is like a bad marketing ploy or whatnot, the defund the police. I've definitely like seen a lot of that, heard a lot of that. And even after the immediate first calls to defund the police, which like that call has been around for a while, but now it has gained sort of like mainstream adoption. Immediately after it began to become more mainstream this time around, we saw people do exactly that, which is to say, like, let's actually redefine what we mean by defund the police, or define it like in many different ways. So
Yeah.
I actually think what's going on is there are many different factions of people using the phrase in different ways. I think there are people who actually do believe defund the police, and I think one thing that I am willing to think about is as a nation, we've been wrong about entire institutions before. Like it took us centuries to realize that slavery was not going to be good for our country. And so I leave myself actually like the space to imagine, what if policing is actually an institution where a century from now, we look back and think, I can't believe they lived in a world like that enabled an institution like this to exist. And if we continue to cling to the permanency of an institution, we're never going to be able to reimagine the alternatives of where that money could go. Because even right now, when folks take the spirit of defund the police to mean move money from one place to the other, it's still to existing institutions. We're still only operating in a world in which we are putting a finite amount of money between things that currently exist. But what if there are things that don't exist yet, that we haven't created? Alternative numbers completely, aside from 911, to get support for something that you're seeing happening on your street. And in some cities, we begin to play with those ideas. And I think I think it is important to like also honor the spirit of defund the police, even if it is scary.
Well, there's a couple things there. I think that it does do something. The slogan is super effective at rallying the base.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're trying to get people out to vote, and you're like, look, y'all, get me in there because we're going to defund the police. They will come. There will be people who could. That's the Trump method. Get the base freaked out. And I mean, on your side.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
Now, here's the thing. I'm pretty loose politically. I could get down with some of that. But if I'm running for office, here's how I say it. I say, what we're going to do is we've got police that are overworked, they're stressed, and the only training we've given them is the kind you use to militarily take down bad guys. And then we gave them the biggest, best weaponry in the world. So what we want to do is we want to use those police funds to support them. So that means there's going to be new programs so that if somebody calls the police, the folks that are more passionate about working in a social work kind of effort, because we've put that on our police, we're going to take some pressure off. We're going to get those folks trained up. They're going to respond. We're going to take some of this money that all we're doing is giving them the biggest, best guns. And we're going to say, man, you don't need those every day. So we're going to have that force.
Or at all.
I know, but you know what I mean? And I'm not, believe me, I'm not even an incrementalist. The problem is, if we are choosing collectively, not me. I don't want the system we have. I hate it. But the collective has chosen this frozen two-party system. So we can use the slogan defund the police, but then we can't get mad when somebody doesn't want to vote for the fellow that wrote the 94 crime bill and still stands behind it.
Yeah.
As the alternative to the police guy.
Yeah.
You know, we got the law and order guy, and we got the shoot him in the leg and throw him in jail 3 times for life guy. So you're not going to sell those powers on defund the police. Their whole campaign was paid for by the folks that want police to be militarized.
Yeah.
So you have to start playing with money.
And I think that like in this particular like example of defund the police, I'm not sure that organizers and activists are like choosing the federal government as like the primary target of their efforts. This is happening locally.
You're right.
Right. And so like there are localities that are choosing to defund the police, like actually doing it, and the rallying cries being implemented into actual like local policy. So I think there is like merit to using the rallying cry like not just as a rallying cry for inspiration, but actual like let's try it. Like because we've like
Yeah.
everything behind us, the centuries of United States have been behind us, that hasn't worked either. So like what is like the next thing that we actually have to try and be willing to try? And it's gonna have to happen small pockets at a time
No, you're
until
right.
we realize
You're right. You know what it is? My response is coming from a place where I am stuck in this rural burg.
yeah,
And
which I'm so curious about. Like,
when I was in California, man, I was in a total bubble.
mhm.
And yeah, you just people. I think that part of the federal thing, those folks, those representatives, and the state level, even being out of touch, is not realizing how that lands in Mayberry.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
because my parents know their cop. They have one. There's one police officer. His name's Charlie.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
his name's Charlie. And if you get a flat tire, he'll probably change it. I mean, you know, it's like
Call Charlie.
we can take money from Charlie. You know, we're not talking about Charlie. You know, like,
Yeah.
but you know, so I'm looking at it like also I'm in a place that is an extremely tense swing state.
Hmm.
So the federal thing is on my mind.
Absolutely.
I mean, in
Absolutely. Mhm.
California is not going to roll red. You know what I mean?
It better not. It better not. I mean, a lot has happened in the last 3 months, so who knows what will happen in the next 3 months, but it better not.
Lord have mercy, but you know, but I'm out here like y'all don't be saying that because this
Hmm.
state hears you and they get mad and they they get crazy over here. So please,
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, but you're right. Like we can't operate locally in a vacuum outside of what is happening federally either. I mean, as someone who's like pretty progressive and running to challenge an incumbent, who other people might say is a corporate Democrat,
yeah,
um, like I really relied on this wave of presidential candidates that were offered up in the primary, right? Like my primary was March 3rd, and on the ballot were like everyone who was running at the time: Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, Pete Buttigieg had dropped out but was still on the ballot. They're just like all of these people who um, who I think engaged people, literally just their presence engaged people into the democratic process. And now that we're down to pretty much two
yeah,
folks, and I personally am not closely aligned with either of the folks up for office at the presidential level. Like it, I can't believe that I will just be able to re-energize everyone again in the same way,
right,
or capture the energy in the same way in the primary. I have to play in a different way and think about what it means to run in a general where it'll be Biden versus Trump.
right.
Mm-hmm.
So let me ask you about a couple of recent developments
Yeah.
because they have to do with your life.
Yeah.
Um, you are, you will be when you win, right? Eh?
Yeah.
The first LGTBIQ person who also is an immigrant.
Right.
Now, I like to say LGTBIQ, and a lot of people skip the I, but I like to have intersex thrown in there.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that is the. I worry sometimes that I'm throwing the I in and it's been abandoned for a good reason. I don't know, but I
Mm-hmm.
like the I.
Mm-hmm.
The Supreme Court just upheld some rights, hey?
Yeah.
And what I wondered what your reaction was to that, and I'd also like your opinion of the DACA ruling too.
Yeah, absolutely. So two big celebrations this past week, but also just the beginning of so much work ahead.
Oh,
Um,
so
so um, uh, I'm gay. I think I said that earlier. So and I'm an immigrant. So both of these things are really just personally meaningful to me. For folks who aren't scrubbed in, the Supreme Court ruled to for the LGBTQ piece, LGBTQIA plus, depending on like the acronym
all of it.
that you use. The Supreme Court ruled that LGBTQ folks would have the same protections under current constitutional protections around sex and gender that cover you at work, basically. So it's like protections for your job based on your identity. Why the?
If I may,
Yeah,
just
go.
simplify that for people. We're only just now living in
Mhm.
America where your employer can't fire you. They find out you're gay. That's where we're at.
Right.
That's how bad it is. But we have it now. So boom.
Yeah. And like super meaningful to me because I mentioned I was a teacher, and in my very first interview, literally to become that 7th grade teacher that I talked about earlier, my principal and I were at my job interview. We were having a great conversation. You know, like toward the end of the interview, he takes a look at my resume and he's like scanning it, and I have a bunch of LGBTQIA leadership roles in college that are on there. And he says to me, he looks at the resume. He's like, look, I really want to hire you, but I just want to let you know that we don't talk about sexuality at my school.
Wow.
And I was 21, and I wanted a job. And at the time, I don't think I had been confident enough in who I was to know what it would mean for me to not access this part of me that was going to affirm my sexuality at work. Like in my head, I was just like, well, of course I'm not going to be talking about sexuality at work in the same way. I was like super naive in my analysis of the world.
I'm sorry, I'm sitting here pissed off because
yeah.
No, but of course you talk about sexuality. What he's saying is he doesn't want you to talk about your sexuality.
Exactly. As a 21-year-old in need of a job, again, like navigating these power structures, I said I understand and got hired, right? So that I could begin my career immediately after college. But what I realized is like the impact that it had on me that year actually rolled out to my students. So you've seen on this video, I'm a very animated person. I laugh a lot, etc. But many people could make connections and draw the line between the ways in which I perform or the way in which I act, my mannerisms. They could draw the line between that and my sexuality. And I had been explicitly told at my interview, we don't talk about sexuality at my school. So what it meant for me was that from day one, I was censoring anything about my life or myself or my personhood that would flag anyone that I was gay. And what that meant for my students was that they never actually built relationships with the real me. And I didn't smile until November at all in my classroom. And I'm someone who like laughs a lot, smiles a lot, etc. And we know that teenagers need people they can trust. And they know when you're not being honest with them about who you are or what you're bringing to them. And so for me, it wasn't just a harm on me. It was a harm on my ability to actually build relationships with students and then therefore support them.
Well, it's so meaningful for them to have adults in their community authentically participating in the world that they talk about in class. To be able to run into someone at the store and say, this is my partner. This is, this is where I buy my pastrami. You know what I mean? Like, and look, here's my partner and our child, or, like that's really wonderful for students to know that you're out there breathing the air with them.
Yeah. And I mean, like, at the time, especially because we didn't have these protections, like even though these protections exist now, it's not going to stop biases from being engaged in schools, right? Like there are always going to be some students, some teachers, some parents who aren't there yet in even baseline acceptance of what it means to be queer or a person who is LGBTQIA. I think though that with these protections now, at least I could then say legally, my principal has to back me, right? Like that my principal cannot let me go on the basis of this, even if I get pushback. And at the time, I couldn't tell which direction was going to be safer for me, being out at school, being not out, like, etc. And I wasn't given the choice to, because I was told, we don't talk about sexuality. To your point, your sexuality at my school.
It's so important to know that your team, professionally, your principal in your case, has your back.
Yeah.
And especially in schools, it's bad enough being, frankly, if I'm really honest, being a man working in a school, you're already at risk. You're already thinking, I don't want to be alone with anybody. I want witnesses everywhere I go, because your entire career for the rest of your life could be destroyed by one claim of inappropriate behavior, whether it happened or not. And people do have those feelings come up. In the real world, people have sexual feelings come up, and some of those people who have those feelings are too young to be acting on them, and then it gets confusing for them, and we need to have compassion for that. But my point is that when someone is of some kind of subaltern group, meaning, I hope I use the right word. What I mean is you're part
Yeah.
of a marginalized group.
Uh,
You're part of a group that gets marginalized, that people make judgments about. And I'm talking about gay men. You know, it doesn't take much for a parent to lay down a serious claim.
yeah, absolutely.
And I know that I had on my end, I happened to be straight, but I was doing a job at a school. I was leading a social and emotional learning workshop in Texas. And I don't want to name the school, but they were saying, you know, what we need after the young, because we did an activity where everybody spoke with each other, and they got to say, if you really knew me, you'd know this about me. This whole activity, you know, the one.
Mhm.
So that sounds like, you know, people might be coming out if they want to, and you know, I'm fine. They can talk about anything they want. They can say I love my dog. You know what I mean? Like, I don't care.
Uh-huh.
It's all good.
Uh,
Or they can say something heavy, and that's why we have counselors and adults with everyone. Like, nobody's saying anything alone. But they had a school policy. It was like a Christian school,
uh-huh.
which, nothing against Christians, but the way they were doing it was like this.
Okay.
If the young person says that they're gay, our policy is we send them to they have a counselor, but then they also have a nice little setup where
Oh
the
no.
conversion,
Oh
you want to
no.
get them into their
Oh,
conversion program and straighten them out.
wow. That's awful.
So I said, I was like, well, I can tell you right now that what I'm going to do is, if I hear something like that and I think a student is in a situation where they need help, I'm going to report it to the counselor, and I'm not going to do that dirt for you. And I think that's super
What year
dirt.
was this, Tony? What year was this?
This wasn't that. I mean, you know, maybe 2012 or something.
Yeah, that's the same decade that, that we're in right now.
Yeah.
Same
And
decade. Yeah.
oh, and they pushed back hard.
Yeah.
Oh, we'll never bring your workshop in here again. We'll never. And they said, and you're gonna. And they told me I was gonna lose my job.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So you know what I said? I said, you go ahead. This is the thing about getting someone's back. So I said, you go ahead and call the office. As a matter of fact, I got my phone out. I was like, I'll make the call for you. And I dialed up the CEO, our openly gay CEO.
Wow. Uh-huh.
Like, you go ahead and tell him what I did. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? You go right ahead. Because
Exactly.
he had my back and I had his back.
Yeah.
And but you know what? How sad is it that we even have to think about that instead of thinking who's got the kids back?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. This is like where we get into the mess of decision makers not having a clue how much happens on the ground in schools. And even though this is a really great protection that the Supreme Court has now put into place to protect all workers, like schools of all places desperately needed that protection, because it's where kids are growing up to see who they can be when they grow up. And if we're policing that, not just with real police, but policing that culturally as well, we're screwing our kids up.
And people make the mistake of thinking that we don't learn racism by somebody just saying to us, now, son, remember gay people and black people, they're bad. No one does that. Mm-hmm. You learn it by someone's implicit biases they don't even know they have leaking out all over you. Now, sometimes you do get trained and indoctrinated directly. I'm not saying that. There are people, I know people like that. But mostly it's the comments. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, well, you don't want to go down there. That's where the Mexicans live. Oh, gee, they must be bad people, right? You just make these connections.
Or just like, oh, be careful. Where are you going? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're going into that part of town. Mm-hmm. You know, I don't know if you should go. Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And you start to have ideas. And we're constantly, I will speak, I don't speak for all white people. I speak for me. Mm-hmm. But I'm the wokest farm boy you ever heard of. But I am constantly learning my racism. When people say they don't see color, I was like, oh, you're definitely all right, there is in fact color in this country. And I, it's how we engage with it. You know, like I didn't even know that I had any racist bias issues about Asian people until I moved to California. Because guess what we don't have a lot of in my part of Ohio? Asians. Now we have here one of the biggest populations of Lebanese people in the world. So I was all down with the Middle Eastern folks, and they have the best food too. So like around here, I mean, it's just like, my goodness, it's wonderful. And I knew a little bit about that crew. I was uncomfortable when I was surrounded by Asians, and I didn't know why. There was no reason. I don't have beliefs about them. I don't act racistly, but I was uncomfortable and had to realize I've just never been around them. And then you think of the media. What have I been indoctrinated with about Asian people without even knowing?
Yeah. Imagine what Asians are indoctrinated in about Asian people or lack thereof.
Yeah.
We internalize a lot of the same messages around what it means to be Asian in the United States.
And then my best friend was a Filipino woman. Or is it Filipina if it's that way?
She might use a variety of different terms. So Filipina is a common way that
I will ask her. But she became my best friend, and it was great because I learned about, I didn't know anything about Filipino culture, you know, like we went down to San Diego for work, and we went to Old Town, and then I met her family, and we had like real, because there is kind of like a, what do they call it? There's a town, like a part of town, it has in San Diego.
National City, Mira Mesa. Like there's a whole bunch of different like Filipino areas.
We were there.
Yeah.
And it might be Little Manila. They might have called it Little Manila.
Okay.
It doesn't matter, but the food. I know I'm all about the food, but I learn about cultures through food. You know, and I was very excited to hear stories about her family and how they grew up here, and it's just amazing, you know.
Yeah, and what's really hard about people who have never met Asian folks, and as they begin to get more exposed to more and more Asian folks, is being Asian is like actually being one of many dozens of ethnicities, right? Like you like in having Filipino food, you cannot expect it to be like Indian food, like Thai food, like Japanese food, because everything is like so different. But we've both when I say we, I mean like Asian Americans have been lumped together by the state, but also chosen to lump together strategically at some times as well. And in the midst of that lumping together, we sometimes erase the differences and diversities of ways in which we've come to the United States, the cultures that we share, all of that. Even in a place like Los Angeles right now, Los Angeles Unified School District, the public school district here, is the largest school district that has a publicly elected board in the nation. So they educate 700,000 kids. And there's tons of Asian people who live here in LA. And only now, literally in the next few months, will they be having enough choices on their enrollment forms to actually be able to disaggregate data between all those different types of Asian folks.
Yeah.
Not just a few, but like all of them. And it's 2020 when we're coming to this at this point.
Oh, it's so amazing. I mean, in the United States, you go to a Chinese restaurant. I'm not sure what part of China they ever eat that, but I'm pretty sure it's just in the United States. Like, I mean, it doesn't even resemble Northern Chinese food or where, I mean, I could have it back, but it just doesn't make sense. And, you know, I mean, there's you were saying there's a lot of, man, in each of the many countries in Asia, and then, you know, you cross over into India and like Eastern, you know, like it all bumps up against each other. There's so many cultures, different lifestyles, different people, different the languages, the histories. I mean, in each country, there's like multitudes, and then you have many, many countries over a huge swath of the earth.
That's right. Yeah, and it's not even just like the different cultures and heritages, et cetera, or languages, but like they all, because there's such a diversity of Asian countries, there are different ways in which each of those countries and communities has interacted with the United States,
Oh,
right? So
yeah.
like when you interact with an Asian person here, their family could have been here for generations through internment camps, have been impacted by like different exclusionary laws, et cetera. And there are folks here who are like refugees, who are undocumented Asian folks as well, right? Like when we think about undocumented folks, you mentioned DACA earlier, like so many people jump immediately to Spanish speaking countries. And that's like not true completely, right? And so we lose not just like the different types of food or the different types of clothing, we lose the fact that like Asian people actually have different experiences of the United States. And so when all you think about is this like model minority myth of, oh, Asians, they're smart, or like they're able to figure their way out, people forget that there's so many different Asian groups who actually are super low income, struggle in school, are impacted by policing and criminal justice in other ways. We forget all of that when we don't consider that diversity too.
Yeah. And I've seen what I consider to be, a very surprisingly rich and deep cultural tapestry in like the one Filipino family I know and their friends.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, and we're talking about the Philippines. We're talking about Asia. We talk about the Philippines like it's Asia, or is it
7,000 islands.
Polynesia, or is it islands? Like people don't even know. And that in and of itself, the geography of it means that the Philippines have a very complex history with the United States and
Yeah.
the military,
Yeah.
and the islands, and
Mhm.
oh Lord have mercy.
All those things. Glad you've had our food.
I've had some. I need to have more, but not enough. Not here. Not here. What about So what about DACA? Like, how did that land? Because it seems like it was more of a problem of the Trump administration's incompetence to fill out the form right.
That's right. Yeah. So for folks who are unfamiliar, DACA stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. It protects folks who are undocumented and came here as of a certain age, as of a certain year. So it's a very limited scope of who actually gets protections underneath DACA. But it's still about 800,000 people, somewhere between 700,000, 800,000 people are able to stay here, get a social security card, pay taxes, go to school, like all of those things as a result of DACA. And the Supreme Court, as you said, oh, the Trump administration didn't challenge this in the right way, so we're going to have to say DACA is protected for now, but it left open this hole of like, well, if the Trump administration did decide to go after this in a different way and filed all the paperwork in as detailed of a way as it needed to be, presented the right arguments, we might be open to throwing out DACA. So it's both like a celebration and a continued waiting game, right, to see what happens. And I think what people also forget with DACA, again, is that there's 11 million undocumented folks here in the United States, and DACA only actually protects 800,000 folks. There were moves to create what was called DAPA, or Deferred Action for Parents of Arrival, so the parents of folks who benefit from DACA, but that was kind of shelved that was shelved even before the Trump administration came into place. So I think there's still a long way to go to actually recognize the humanity and dignity of everyone who lives here in the United States. So this is one really important win that protects people who I know and love. But we've got a ways to go.
And I said this before on another one too, but it's like, we've got to stop thinking that people are illegal or legal.
Mm-hmm.
We've got to think about it like, to use our southern border as an example, I was saying to somebody, we need to talk about it like this. That is a Mexican citizen who is in the United States seeking asylum, or that's a Mexican citizen who crossed the border illegally in a desperate situation and they need our help. We can think about it in a very different way than calling a person illegal. There are no illegal people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Especially when the United States propagates a phony drug war and blows up your nation, and then we're going to get mad when you run away from the corrupt government, the cartels, and you come over the border, and now we're going to punish you. We just blew up. We just armed the cartel that's chasing down your family. It's dirty.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And again, I said this while we were talking about housing, but I think this is another place where people can feel really challenged with their values of like, yeah, I believe humans should have these fundamental human rights. And here we are actually saying, you're a human here, but we don't recognize you in the same way. So let's take away all your abilities to survive. Like that doesn't stick. We have a lot of interrogating of ourselves to do if we say we believe in human rights.
You know, there's a lot of excuses get made, like, I don't understand it. Like, to me, if there's another human being that says, yo, I'm suffering, I don't see how there's any way to be with that except how did this suffering come to be and how can we work to alleviate that suffering? What other job? But everyone, well, so-and-so was shot by the police, but has he done crimes before? Yeah, I don't know. Maybe he's doing a crime right now, but we have a court system to figure that out, and you don't shoot him in the street. This is very simple. Right. It's very simple.
That's right.
And so the only way we can think that person doesn't get that is if we have othered them to such a strong degree that we have thrown away their humanity. And that's why we say human rights. Yeah. So if we're willing to say, oh, gee, there's an entire neighborhood of people struggling to keep a roof over their head, they must be idiots.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's like, wait, why don't we find out what caused that? Hey, you know what? Hey, Mr. Bigot, I don't know, maybe they're idiots. Let's just go, maybe they're idiots. How are we going to fix it, though?
Yeah.
How do you fix it? Because if you think they're idiots, are you doing anything to get funding for schools for American citizens?
Yeah. Well, this is like what you're naming is exactly what a system of meritocracy that the United States is founded upon wants us to do. It's like not to help each other or not to be considerate of who else in our community might be needing some sort of support or someone who might have a disparate experience from yourself, right? Like meritocracy for folks who, I'm using academic words, sort of like, you mentioned a word earlier. I was like, I think you said subaltern. I was like, I got you. But meritocracy is the idea that that you can earn your way to certain statuses and privileges, et cetera, and success. And so for folks who staunchly believe in that, this idea of helping other people who don't seem like they're at the same level as you is ridiculous. And that's awful. For someone like me who believes otherwise, that's awful. But we've bought into it so hard as a country. And I think we really, really have to reconsider the values that we hold as a nation if we're ever going to convince people to care for their neighbor.
And it's, people don't like to make the reach that hurts. And it's intoxicating for all people to live in America, to believe in the meritocracy.
Yeah.
Because it's easier for me to believe on one end that I earned my right to go to college and be okay right now and stuff, versus I'm going to college because I'm standing on the shoulders of a lot of people. I participated in an economy that for all those hundreds of years was set up to advantage me over an entire other group of people. Heck, my grandfather was awarded land by the King of England that belonged to American indigenous people. And I just kind of started there. And it doesn't matter what kind of hardships my grandfather had or what he worked through. It doesn't matter. It matters. It matters that he did those things. It makes him a great man. It doesn't diminish him. However, if I believe that I just earned it all, or my family earned it and passed it down through just hard work and grit, I don't have to consider that now it's time for that trickle down to take effect, and I invest in other communities so that we all get to experience that. If I'm at the other end, if I'm suffering in poverty, it's easier to think, gee, this is America though. And so if I just work really hard, if I just keep banging my head against this wall hard enough, I will come out of this and I will move up the ladder in America, because that's what the dream is.
Mm.
And yet that almost never happens.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It is extraordinarily rare
Yeah.
for an American citizen to move from the class they were born in.
Yeah. You see, the New York Times had a really great graphic, I want to say last year or the year before that, where they tracked Black folks of many different income levels and white folks of many different income levels. And they tracked a long time, like how well they were able to upkeep that particular income level or move up or down. And just as you would expect, like regardless of income level of a Black person, like white folks were much more likely to find themselves on an up and up kind of movement in that graphic, while Black folks continue to to have fewer and fewer chances to actually stay on a high level, let alone move their way up.
And the reason for that is that when wealth is transferred, mm-hmm. statistically, that's happening through intergenerational pass down of wealth mm-hmm. and investment. Mm-hmm. And folks that are very poor are not, by nature of where you are, and of course we already said there's obviously racism in all of this, but it's also tied so directly to class. Duh, if you're barely making enough to eat, right? If you're not making enough to eat and feed everyone, you're probably not investing in some kind of startup. I mean, there's not extra money to play with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And like, I think what the chart also shows is there are other institutions that make it more possible for white folks to build on their privilege. And even if you already come in with a certain level of privilege as a Black person, you still have to swim through all of these other institutions that are working against you, that you have to work literally twice as hard, if not more, to be able to even maintain your status.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And yeah, it's terrible. Yeah. Is there any specific legislation items or things that if your folks tune in, or if you direct them here, what do you want them to know about your ideas? And is there anything novel or anything that separates you from your opponents?
I mean, a couple of things. I mentioned rent earlier. But that's certainly like a huge issue, the number one issue in our entire district. And all of this you can find on our website at godfreyforassembly.com. When I think about other distinctions, I mean, I've been talking about education this entire time. California, despite being the world's 5th largest economy, consistently underfunds our students at a per student kind of rate. So we might have about somewhere around $12,000 for each student to fund them for the entire year in our public school system, versus New York City, which is the only other city that is bigger than us, is at $22,000 per student. There's this huge gap in the amount of funding we have for our schools. I have an education background. On our education committees in Sacramento, there's only 2 people on each committee who have ever worked in schools before. So we're severely underrepresented in terms of being educators as well. My passion, a lot of my passion, as you've heard on this call, has to do around racial justice. And the current hot topic at the moment is policing and criminal justice. The person I'm running against literally has tens of thousands of dollars coming in from police union money, et cetera, to prop him into place. And he's not likely to support any of this legislation to hold police more accountable, or to defund the police for that matter. If he's not holding them accountable, he's not going to defund the police. Right. The ACLU of Southern California has really had to push him previously to make sure he stood on the right side of history around accountability issues, versus I literally just told you a story about how I reject even how police operate in our schools. We're literally on opposite sides of this line. So for these reasons and a lot more, I'm really excited about being able to represent these issues. But we have to be able to get out there. And right now in a pandemic, we can't go door to door in a campaign. So we're having to work overtime to make sure we raise the money and all of that to get that funding out there.
Gosh, I hope you do.
Yeah, I do too. But, like I said, part of what we are trying to do is accept wins as the only type of win in the United States. So I am someone who really sees value in the process of this too. Like just by being a contender in a runoff against an incumbent like this and running in the way we are, I feel really good about what we're already offering to democracy.
I'm excited about it. I'm not even out there. I'm not even
Uh-huh.
I like the only way that I believe in bubble up economics, bubble up political change. I mean, we're going to have to start filling seats in these local governments to give the people some direct representation.
Mm-hmm.
And it's from there that we're going to grow the folks who are going to take seats from establishment political organizations that have become corrupt in the House, the Senate, and eventually the White House, the Supreme Court. It'd be great if these things looked like America.
Yeah, absolutely. And the system is going to work against regular people like us who are taking the chance to run. Only 10% of folks who are first-time candidates end up winning. So that's like not a great batting average across the nation. But unless we actually enter and re-enter and re-enter, we're not giving people an option to be able to vote for someone like them.
That's right.
So even being the choice really matters. And then to your point, like if you've gotten ready, then you're ready for the time there's a vacancy. And you never know when you're going to be called to lead. So like start jumping in there right now. Even if you think you don't match the model of what it means to be an elected official, that's exactly why we need you to run. Because you're not like anyone else.
And people that just vote, if that's an important role in government.
Yeah.
So if people are watching, it would be valuable for every American, instead of looking to what political candidates are available to choose one, spend some time with what matters to me locally. Mm-hmm. What matters to me around the issues that actually affect my life? And is there a candidate fighting for me? That's how we want to think about it. Who do I want to go in that fight for me? Not which are my choices. And I get so mad when people say I'm going to choose the lesser evil. Mm-hmm. I don't vote for evil. Mm-hmm. I understand it because I will vote even if I don't, not crazy about a candidate. And I believe me, I do vote often for the lesser evil. Mm-hmm. But I'm making my decision carefully. Mm-hmm. And I'm not gonna vote for someone that doesn't, I want my vote to feel like it betters my life. And I want my candidate to prove it. Like, mm-hmm. What do you offer? Even if it's just one little thing, you better have something.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. On all levels of government.
I'm excited, man. I hope that I want to follow this. I want to see how this goes.
Yeah. We can do a before and after. Like come back
great.
After the election. Just be like, how did it go? Uh-huh.
I'd be into it. So you have to let me know every time there's a major development.
Which is like, where are we now in a pandemic and an uprising? There's a major development every single week. I'm like, what's happening?
Well, like if we don't have any elections, for example, because
oh my gosh, yeah,
getting crazy out there, man.
Yeah. No, we better we better have an election, to say the least.
Well, I'll be looking for those well-regulated militia people to step up.
Well, hopefully I'll have good news to share when we update on the back end of the election or whatnot. And like I said, this is about process and outcome for me. So I'm sure there'll be many positive things to share at a later date.
I can't wait. Godfrey, thank you so much. And I'm really glad that we got the connection.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you for the interest in talking about what's on my mind. Hopefully we educated some folks out there today. We're teaching them lots of words like subaltern and meritocracy, but yeah.
This was really fun for 4 humans who watch my show.
Yeah. We'll post it in case people need an hour and a half of things to watch and to listen to.
I think it's valuable to spend that kind of time with a candidate.
Yeah. People don't get the inside. They just get the 2 minutes, but this is part of it. It's all in the process, and we're not keen to it enough.
No shortcuts.
Yeah.
All right, Godfrey, I'm gonna stop recording.
Okay.
Thank you for coming.
Thanks.